Howdy my totally tubular gamers, we're back with another video. Let's get to it. Now picture this. You're really excited for a game that's about to come out. Maybe it's in one of your favorite series. Maybe you really respect the developer and they've got a great track record. Maybe you've just got a really good feeling about this game. But then once you get the game and you finally play it, it really isn't all that great, or it's not what you expected at all. And it could be for a number of reasons. Maybe the story's kinda ass. Maybe the game just isn't all that fun. Maybe it just isn't what you thought it was going to be at all. Well, regardless of the reason, I don't think we have to picture that scenario. I think most people that play video games have been there at some point, where ultimately they walked away from a game feeling rather disappointed. And that's really what today's video is all about. I'm going to be talking about the 20 most disappointing games that I've ever played. At this moment in my life, I've played over 2,000 games, so I was bound to be disappointed at some point. This isn't a ranking from least to most disappointing. This list is in no particular order. I've got my reasons for every single one of these games, and I'm going to explain them all to you. This video is probably going to be a long one, a lot of story time with Jonathan, so get the popcorn, get the beef jerky, the Wendy's spicy nuggets, start up the car, get in bed, whatever you're going to do to watch or listen to this video. We might be here a minute. This intro doesn't need to go on forever. We're talking about disappointing games. Let me know down below about some of the most disappointing games you've ever played, as well as any feedback on the video. If you agree, disagree, let me know down below. I'm always lurking down there. Let's get a discussion going. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I got the Patreon and the super thanks. Any support is truly, and I mean truly, greatly appreciated. I do want to give a major shout out to all my patrons. Thank you so very much. I love you all. And a quick little shout out to Froyo333. Thank you, man. Alright, let's get to the disappointing games. So kicking things off, we have a game that, yes, I have made an entire video about, but it's my most disappointing game of all time. I don't think I've ever played a game where I was this disappointed, and yes, it's for Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5. I have played many, and I mean many new games on release day, but I don't think I've ever been so angry, so upset with a game when it released. There have been plenty of releases where I was a bit upset and even disappointed, as this list will showcase, but this game genuinely pissed me off. So I'll keep things pretty brief here. I'll just say I saved up for the game, got it on release, came home, and just went, what the fuck is this? I was just immediately appalled with this game. I could not believe how bad it really was. And it's not like it was bad in a select area or two, or it was just a little buggy and unfinished. No, it was genuinely terrible in every single aspect outside of the music. The music, yeah, it was okay. Everything from the horrid presentation, the terrible controls, the awful physics, always online bullshit, ridiculous loading times, uninteresting objectives, terrible level design, and glitches up the ass really ruined this one for me. And the shitty part was, I knew this game was ass right from the get-go. I didn't play the game for like 4 or 5 hours and then go, yeah, this isn't very good. No, I knew in the first hour that this game was a pile of shit, and I just went, this is nothing like the other pro skaters. This is wildly unfinished. It doesn't feel nice at all. These levels aren't exciting. These mission objectives feel like they belonged on the PS1, not a PS4 Xbox One game. Are you kidding me? The game was a complete train wreck when it came to how polished it was, or the presentation in general. It looked like shit, it played like shit, and it glitched out all the damn time. And the bottom line was, it just wasn't any fun. I played maybe 3-4 hours of this game on release and went, fuck this, I am taking this game back. I just couldn't believe that I was playing a game with the Tony Hawk name in it. I love the Pro Skater series. Pro Skater 3 is like one of my favorite games of all time. I really thought this game at its worst would be just kind of meh, not one of the worst video games I've ever played. Genuinely just a travesty through and through. Funny enough though, I actually even made a video about the game. I just had a full-on rant about the game. Yes, even back in 2015, I was making videos. I've been on YouTube a long time, and I've hated this game for a long time. It doesn't get much more disappointing than Pro Skater 5. And I'm not talking about just video games. I'm talking about throughout my entire life, getting rejected by my high school crush, getting laid off by Insomniac, and this fucking game. Some of the most disappointing things of my entire life. Okay, things got a little heated there. Let's take it down a notch. Let's talk about a still disappointing but less disappointing title, Aliens Colonial Marines. Now, I very much remember when this one came out in 2013, people were immediately saying that it was one of the worst games of the 2010s, and yeah, looking back, it absolutely was. I was still in high school when this one came out and didn't have a lot of money. I planned on renting this one instead, so I went to Redbox the day it came out. Yeah, you remember Redbox where you could rent movies and games for a few days? I went to Redbox, rented this game for like $6 total, went home, played through the campaign, messed around with the multiplayer, and went, wow, this game isn't very good at all. I remember I was going to rent the game for the entire weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I actually just took it back Saturday because I was so displeased with it. And it's very well documented that this isn't a very good game by like any metric. The story is really whatever, and this was something they were absolutely hyping the shit out of, and I think it might even be canon. But I sure hope it's not. It was just a forgettable mess. And when it came to the gameplay, forgettable mess is a great way to describe it. It's just a very under average first person shooter with some brain dead AI, lame set pieces, poor pacing, and it was just a really unexciting campaign. Even if you were playing with others, there just wasn't a lot going for this game. I remember also being really weirded out that there were firefights against other humans. Like, what even? No, we're supposed to be fighting the aliens. The game also wasn't very good from a technical perspective, and then when it came to the multiplayer, yeah, it was just rather forgettable. I know that some people have had some fun with this game, but I really was not interested in this. I was not picking up what it was putting down and was just disappointed by the whole thing. This should have been like one of the best alien games of them all, especially for the time, but instead we got arguably the worst alien game ever made. At the very least, like a year later, we would get the best alien game of all time with Alien Isolation, but Colonial Marines is always going to be a disappointing one. Alright, I said Pro Skater was my most disappointing game of all time. Well, here comes maybe my second most disappointing game of all time, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. This is another game that made me quite upset. It didn't piss me off like Pro Skater 5 did, but this is one that I knew pretty quick wasn't a very good game and that I had just wasted a ton of money on it. Now, back when this game came out in 2012, I was in high school and I didn't have much money at all. I saved up all my lunch money for like a month so that I could get this game. I was excited. I know the game didn't look great from the trailers, but I was just so excited for a new Resident Evil, especially one where you could move and shoot. That was a big deal to me. I had just played through like all of the older Resident Evils, or at least the main games, and so I was excited to see Raccoon City be built up for this new generation. If only I knew that this really would be Operation Raccoon Shitty. And you know, at first, I didn't think the game was all that bad. I was like, ooh, I'm Hunk and all of his guys. I'm in Raccoon City. I can move and shoot. This game ain't so bad. But then the more and more I played of it, the less and less I liked it. The game started to get stale rather fast. It was getting repetitive, and I actually had trouble even just finishing it because I just thought it was so unexciting. I didn't like the story. I didn't like where it was going. I certainly didn't like the ending. And by the time I was done with it, I just thought it was extremely generic and shouldn't have even had the Resident Evil name on it. So naturally, once I was done with the campaign, I decided to try the multiplayer, and the multiplayer was just terrible. I was not interested in this deathmatch shit at all. I was like, this sucks. This is not fun. And then I was like, okay, maybe if I play some of the co-op missions or mess around in the campaign with my friends, it'll be a bit more fun. So then I hit up all of my friends who said they were going to get the game, only for them to go, actually, Jonathan, we didn't get the game. We heard it was pretty ass and we canceled our pre-orders. You didn't actually get the game, did you? So yeah, none of my friends actually got the game and I couldn't play with people I know. I tried the co-op a little bit, but at that point, the damage was done. I didn't want to look at this game anymore. I was so disappointed. And all these years later, I still think about Operation Raccoon Shitty, one of the worst Resident Evil games of them all. Alright, so I've been talking about games that are like 10 plus years old. Let's talk about a game that actually came out in the last few years. Here we have Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which is 1 year old. Now yes, I know many YouTubers have made fun of this game and its shortcomings and expressed their disappointment with it. Yours truly has as well. I've talked about this game a number of times, so I'll keep things pretty brief here. Game was being made by a legendary developer, Rocksteady, who have made some of my favorite games of all time. I love Arkham City, I love Arkham Asylum, I even love Arkham Knight, so pretty high pedigree. The game had a ton of potential. I think the Suicide Squad are awesome, and this really could have been something special, but instead it is a live service looter shooter that may have some good ideas. It's even got some good moments to it, but was ultimately just wildly disappointing. I don't think this is a terrible game. I don't think it's an atrocious piece of shit like some people think, but that doesn't mean it's not one of the most disappointing games I've ever played. It was just really under average. Even though the shooting was okay at best, none of these characters should feel this similar. I would hope that all of them would feel wildly different from each other, but they don't outside of the traversal mechanics, which are actually kind of cool. The combat has some good moments and elements to it, but ultimately just doesn't really come together. The open world, unfortunately, is terrible, the side objectives are awful, the boss fights are a joke, and then the story, yeah, it should have been a lot more than it was. At least the game was really good looking, it is a pretty game, but sadly, not a very good one. This one still stings, and I just really wish things turned out differently. I really do with this one. And so here we have a game I could talk about all day, and that is Shenmue 3. While I don't think Shenmue 3 is a terrible game, it certainly was a bit disappointing. I actually quite enjoy Shenmue 1 and 2, maybe it's because I love the Yakuza series so much, but I actually like Shenmue, and so for Shenmue 3, I was pretty excited for it. I'm not going to act like I waited 15 plus years for this game, but I was still quite excited for it. But after playing all the way through it, I just went, really? That was it? While there were plenty of things that I enjoyed about Shenmue 3, there was a number of aspects where I was just like, seriously? When it came to the gameplay, I was just really mixed about it. On the one hand, it played just like the old Shenmue games. Like, we're talking almost exactly the same, where you just kind of wander around these small open areas talking to people and gathering information. And then, of course, from time to time doing mini games or getting into fights. So yeah, it's really faithful to the old games, but on the other hand, it had been like 15 plus years since Shenmue 2. Video games, especially open world games, have come a long way since then, and I would have expected a few modern tweaks and improvements, but no, it really just played like the old games, warts and all. It still has that glacial pacing, and it wastes plenty of your time. And you know, maybe some people were all about it. To a certain extent, I am as well, but I wanted to see some improvements here. Then I didn't really care for the fighting in this game, and the minigames, they were just too similar to what Shenmue 1 and 2 had. I expected some new stuff here, and there was a little bit, but it really wasn't that great. Now, while the gameplay can be forgiven, at least to me, the story is really where I was disappointed the most with this game. Shenmue 2 is like a crazy cliffhanger. This game doesn't really do anything with it, and it ends on a cliffhanger as well. I don't want to spoil anything here, but I'll just say this game feels like filler when it comes to the story. It really feels like filler, and almost nothing meaningful happens here. Now, maybe I'm the silly one for expecting some kind of closure here, but I feel like we are in almost the exact same place as we were when Shenmue 2 ended. And it's like, you really think we're gonna get a Shenmue 4? We had to get a Kickstarter for this game, and I'm pretty sure it sold like ass also. I know that the director, the creator, Yu Suzuki, has this giant drawn-out Shenmue plan, but I really thought he would speed things up, considering that I don't think we're gonna be getting another Shenmue game. But no, he's really sticking to his original story, and while I like that he's sticking to the artist's vision, I also accept the reality that we may not get another Shenmue, and this very well might be the ending we actually are stuck with. So yeah, with all of this combined, Shenmue 3 was pretty disappointing. While I absolutely would pre-order a Shenmue 4 day one, not even close, I would certainly be going into it with very, and I mean very, different expectations. Well, at least we always got the Yakuza games. Haven't let me down yet. So here's a game that'll never not have me shaking my head, and that is Star Fox Zero. Now, I like the Star Fox series. Okay, I really just like one game, and that's Star Fox 64, but I was ready to give this game a chance. I actually have a Wii U, and this was one of the few games I got for it. I got it at release and played it for about an hour or two and just went, man, what the hell? Since then, I've gone back to it since I do want to rank all of the Star Fox games, and I actually have finished it, but every time I pick that game up, I was just not having a good time, and it's for the same reason that pretty much everybody else says they don't enjoy this game. The controls, like, what were they thinking with this? The controls are terrible. They are wildly unintuitive. We could make a whole 10-minute rant on just the controls alone. I'm sure plenty of people have. The controls really just ruin the entire game. They're just so cumbersome, and all over the place, but even if you look at the game outside of the controls, I still think it was decently disappointing. The game really just feels like a rehash of Star Fox 64, and not in a good way. A lot of the missions feel very similar to 64 and it doesn't play as well, and then the new missions aren't even that great either. Like a stealth mission, what were they thinking here? While the presentation is pretty nice and the story is kinda cool, this game is just full of issues, and it's arguably the most disappointed I've ever been from a Nintendo game. I didn't expect that stupid Animal Crossing party game to be any good. I expected Star Fox Zero to actually be at least decent, but no. What we were left with is just a disappointing mess. There's a reason Nintendo has not tried to do a single new Star Fox game since Zero, and that's a damn shame. Well, here we have a game I'd rather forget about, and that is Redfall. So Redfall, yeah, there's really no two ways about this one. Redfall was a pretty disappointing game. It was actually one of the games that made me want to get a new computer. I had been using the same PC for almost 10 years and I was like, nope, it's time for a full upgrade, new graphics card, new CPU, everything, the works. And for what game? Well, I'm not going to say this was the only one, but Redfall was one of the top reasons why I wanted a new computer, and yeah, I was pretty disappointed by this one. And you know, this one didn't look like total shit before it came out. It looked fine enough, and it was by Arcane Austin, who made the pretty underrated Prey, so I had some hope for it, but after sitting down and playing the game for like 5 or 6 hours, I was just like, I don't think I'm going to be playing any more of this game. I've talked about Redfall a number of times, even pretty recently, so I'll keep things rather brief here. The story is almost non-existent, and I found all of the characters to just be incredibly forgettable. The gameplay is rather dull. The open world is one of the worst open worlds I've seen in a modern game. The shooting and combat in general just doesn't feel very good. The AI are actually just dumb as rocks and don't really put up all that much of a threat. The special abilities and RPG mechanics are similarly a joke. And I could say the same for the looter-shooter elements and the cooperative elements. It just doesn't really add anything to the game. It is rather dull. The presentation was also kind of a disaster. It wasn't a great-looking game, and it ran like ass, especially when it came out. The game not only lacked all of the magic of Arcane's previous games, but it was a horrible immersive sim, which is like a cardinal sin for Arcane. These are the people that made Dishonored and Prey. Like, this is just crap in comparison, but even by itself, removed from all of that, this just wasn't a very good game. It was one of the biggest L's Xbox has ever taken, and it did irreparable damage to the studio. The studio literally closed down, and that's never good to hear. You don't want to hear about people out of work. Well, this game put people out of work. It really was that disappointing. And I'll just say, I'm glad I made my PC for a few other games that, you know, happen to actually be good, like Hi-Fi Rush and Indiana Jones. So here we have another one that I don't think is a terrible game, but certainly a disappointing one, and that is Crackdown 3. Now, I thought Crackdown 1 and 2 were pretty good. They weren't like fantastic, but they were decent open world games. They kind of were GTA clones in a few aspects, but I had a lot of fun with them, especially the first one. So when I saw the third one, I got a little excited. Not only was it a new Crackdown game after quite some time, but the trailers were really hyping this one up. The trailers went nuts for Crackdown 3. Like, they were hyping the shit out of this game, and they showed a lot of the game. Unfortunately, though, it just kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and by the time it finally came out, it felt like barely anybody even cared about it. But I cared about it. I checked it out and went, wow, this is really underwhelming. While the game wasn't an absolute dumpster fire like some people said it was, I didn't think it was all that great. It is very, and I mean very similar to Crackdown 1 and 2, to the point where I'm just like, I expected it to be similar, sure, but not almost the same when it comes to the gameplay. It feels like there was barely any modernizations or tweaks here, kind of like Shenmue. But the gameplay of Crackdown isn't as outdated as Shenmue. It still actually plays like, you know, a modern game at the end of the day. It's just Crackdown 3's open world was so disappointing also. There's just nothing really to it. It's generic, it's forgettable, it's unexciting, and the same could really be said for most of the gameplay. It's just kind of unexciting. While it certainly has its moments, it controls well, and there are some cool set pieces, it just wasn't anything that we were promised. That super high level of destruction and chaos really just wasn't there whatsoever. The chaos was actually rather tame. I'd say it's on par with the first two games, which is what maybe we should have all expected. At the end of the day, Crackdown 3 really was just kind of forgettable as a whole. Like, I look back on it, I think about it, and I'm just like, man, I can barely recall anything about that game outside of the disappointment. This is one of those instances where the trailers really oversold the game. And the end result, it left a lot to be desired. While I'm not going to act like this is the worst game on the list, absolutely not, far from it, it should have been better than what we ended up getting. So here we have a pretty infamous one. It is Mighty Number 9. Now, if you've forgotten about this one, well, you're not alone. This was the kickstarted game by the Mega Man creator, and this came out when people were absolutely starved for classic platformers like Mega Man. Capcom had pretty much just forgotten all about the Blue Bomber, and this was supposed to be the next step, the evolution for Mega Man, but it ended up being just kind of a disaster. Now, I didn't kickstart the game just because I really don't like to kickstart games, because I'm not actually sure if they're going to come out, so I waited for this one to release, but I did get it on release day. I just paid full price for it. And man, that really was a mistake. Mighty Number 9 is one of the most underwhelming 2D platformers I've played just ever. While it's not absolutely god-awful, it doesn't really do anything all that well either. I remember when this game came out, it got absolutely ass-blasted for its presentation, and you know what? I think it deserved it. It's just not a very good looking game. I don't really care for the art style. The explosions just look like pizza. I don't even know what happened here. It just looked kind of terrible. Like, even as a kickstarted game, I think this could have looked a lot better, but outside of that, the gameplay, it just left a lot to be desired. While it controlled okay, and the game certainly did have a few moments that actually did feel like Mega Man, but for the most part, it just felt really generic and cheap. And in some areas, it just kind of felt like a cheap knockoff of Mega Man. And I get it, it's supposed to be like Mega Man to an extent, but this, yeah, it just didn't really have all that much of its own identity, and I really wasn't picking up what it was putting down. The level design was very generic, the game wasn't particularly all that challenging. The bosses were forgettable. Shit, the entire game was actually rather forgettable outside of it being a pretty big disappointment. At this point, I'm pretty sure it's gone down as one of the most disappointing kickstarted games period. Like, this one really did garner a lot of attention, and when it came out that the game wasn't very good, that also got a lot of attention, but for some reason my dumbass still got it at release and went, yeah, it's just not very good. Part of me though kind of wishes this game got a sequel. I feel like they actually really could have improved a lot of things with a sequel. I mean, look at Mega Man 1 to 2, that was a huge jump. I think the same thing could have happened there, but the world will never know. So here we have a game that isn't that old. It is Payday 3. Now this one came out in 2023 and was easily my most disappointing title of the entire year. And while this one still could theoretically come back and be a good game, I'll never be able to get over that launch. That launch was exceptionally disappointing. Now, I played Payday 1 at launch. I thought it was pretty decent. I played Payday 2 at launch. I thought it was actually pretty great. But Payday 3, they really botched this launch. It is well documented that there was a lot of server issues, but even outside of the numerous server issues and always online bullshit, the game was lacking in several key areas. While the gunplay certainly felt better than Payday 2's, it just felt like such a step backwards for the series. It felt like it took steps back from Payday 2, like you couldn't do planning, there weren't any multi-day heists, the heists themselves weren't as fleshed out as, say, Payday 2's, and I just didn't find any of them as exciting as Payday 2's. There also wasn't all that many of them. The whole leveling up and experience system along with the challenges just didn't seem all that well implemented or thought out. It actually reminded me of Halo Infinite's challenges, which is not a good thing, and I didn't like just how limited your arsenal felt, especially at the beginning of the game. I will say the stealth is significantly better than what Payday 2 had, that cannot be denied at all, but you couldn't even play it when it came out. You were just stuck in an infinite loop and you couldn't even play solo. It was just absolutely ridiculous. Once you could actually play the game, yes, I did play through the game, I played all of the heists, and I just felt kind of underwhelmed. It felt like the game had more of a bare bones launch than even Payday 2, and at this point Payday 2 is just kind of goated. There's so many updates, 10 years worth of updates. Of course it wasn't going to be able to compete with Payday 2 in terms of content, customization, etc., but I just feel like it wasn't even really able to stand up by itself either. At this point, I'm pretty sure most people have gone back to Payday 2 or stopped playing Payday entirely, and that's a real shame. Payday 3 really should have been the next big step for this series and really moved everything forward, but I feel like instead it did the opposite and pushed everyone back to Payday 2. I doubt that many people are playing this game at this point. I don't even think it's on Game Pass anymore, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it. I know that they have been updating it, and I think an offline mode is finally in the game, but it might be too little too late. This one was rather disappointing. So here we have a game that I know a lot of people have wanted me to talk about. I've never talked about it on the channel. I've certainly talked about the series, but not this game, and that game is Grand Theft Auto 5. I'm sorry, I mean the Saints Row reboot. Oh, the Saints Row reboot. We could be here all day. I could have just an absolute field day with this one. But I'm not going to. You already know what's wrong with the Saints Row reboot. It was just a massively disappointing game, not only for me, but the entire community. The Saints Row community is very divided. There are a number of people who think that they should have stuck with the gangster ways of 1 and 2, and there are a lot of people who like the crazy wacky shit of 3 and 4, but this reboot, it actually brought everybody together. It did the unthinkable. It brought the entire fan base together to say, fuck off. Like, nobody liked this game, including me. It just has a multitude of issues, and you know what? I'm not even going to give it the satisfaction of actually going into it. I'll just say, I got this one at launch. I really wish I didn't. I got rid of it pretty quick. One day, when I have the mental capacity to unpack this game, I'll get into it, but that day is not today. So here's a game that'll always be at least somewhat disappointing, and that is Duke Nukem Forever. While I don't hate Duke Nukem Forever, I don't think it's this awful abomination like plenty of other people say it is, it's hard to not be disappointed with this one. It was in development forever, and after all that time it ended up being just a really mediocre first-person shooter. I remember getting the game actually when it came out. I remember it came out like right when I was graduating from 8th grade, so I asked for it as a graduation gift, and yeah, I certainly got what I wanted, which was Duke Nukem Forever. When it comes to this game's story and comedy, I know a lot of people didn't like it. I'll just say 8th grade Jonathan thought it was pretty funny. Nowadays though, in current year, yeah, probably not. The game had a few jokes here and there though. So while that might have felt like a relic, the gameplay certainly felt like a relic. It just didn't really feel like it knew what it was doing. It tries to be a modern shooter, but it also has elements of it not being a modern shooter, and it kind of just feels like a hodgepodge and suffers from a bit of an identity crisis. The game also has a bunch of just awful fucking mini games, and it really wants you to do these for some reason. Some parts are just not all that fun to play, like when you're in the strip club. When you're driving around in the monster truck, it's not great. There's just Vaseline all over the fucking screen. And then the pacing of the campaign in general just isn't all that great. There actually was a DLC for this game, funny enough, that ended up being way better than the main game, but nobody actually talks about that, so I guess I won't either. Then there was a multiplayer mode that was just as bad as you would expect it to be. And really, at the end of the day, all these years later, like almost 15 years later, I think everybody wanted more from this game. We all saw that trailer from like 2000 that was actually pretty good, that has since been released, and it actually is a bit impressive, but the actual official game itself, it certainly left a lot to be desired. It's kind of crazy how far away we are now from Duke Nukem Forever's release. I'm pretty sure we're further away from it now than the length of it being in development. But it doesn't really matter what year it is, whether it's 2011, 2015, 2025, 2035, 2045, this one's always going to sting a little bit. So here's one that I'm sure a lot of people felt the same way about, and that is Dead Rising 4. Now, I know that the Dead Rising community is a little split on the later games, but I think we can all come together to say that Dead Rising 4 just wasn't a very good game. And it's a shame. Like many others on this list, I actually got it at release. I was rather excited for it. I love the Dead Rising franchise. 1 and 2 are awesome, and I really do love Dead Rising 3, even all these years later. But 4, man, this game was not it. Not only did it fail to understand what even made a Dead Rising game to begin with, but even on its own, I just didn't think it was all that good of a game. Sure, it does have some fun moments when you just go on an absolute tear and annihilate as many zombies as possible. There is a little bit of fun to be had there, but outside of that, man, I really was not enjoying this one. I don't care for the story. I certainly don't like Frank West in this game. He doesn't even feel like Frank West. He feels like a wannabe Marvel character, and the writing in general was just really bland and mediocre. When it came to the gameplay, while it does have some decent elements to it, it doesn't have any challenge, any pressure, the time mechanic's just gone, there's no psychos, and it gives you the good shit just way too early. Dead Rising's all about struggling in the beginning, then as you get better and better, you get better weapons, your character gets better, and you just become super powerful. Here, you just start super powerful, and the game actually starts to get stale. It has a rather bland open world, there's not very many exciting objectives. Being a photographer detective isn't really exciting either. I don't like the ending and subsequent DLC. All of that shit just turned me off. I was like, man, what are we even doing here? When I was playing this game, I was just like, what are we even doing here? How is this like Dead Rising other than it being in a mall and starring Frank West? It feels like they just missed Dead Rising's soul entirely, but even if you take it away from all of that, it was just kind of forgettable. Maybe I should have expected Dead Rising 4 to be of this quality because of the direction that 3 was starting to take, but I still thought the game would have been, you know, decent at least. This was just average at best, and at its worst, it was just bad. At the very least, it didn't kill off the franchise. There was Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster, so I guess I don't hate the game as much now that there has been a game after this, but for a while there, I thought this game killed off the series, and that'll never not be disappointing. So here we have a game that I've actually never talked about on the channel, and that is No Man's Sky. Now, I got No Man's Sky when it came out. I was very excited for it. I was excited to explore. It actually released on my birthday as well. I asked for it for my birthday, and I played it on my birthday. I played it the day after as well, and then I ended up returning the game because I was so unhappy with it. A lot of people were very unhappy with No Man's Sky when it released, and for good reason. The way they hyped this game up, the way they built everything up, and then what the game actually was. Yeah, I didn't like it at all. I thought it was so boring, so uninteresting. These planets were incredibly barren, and the game didn't even have multiplayer. Like, at the very last minute, they put a statement out saying, hey, the game doesn't actually go online. We know we kind of sold it to you that way. Look, No Man's Sky, very well documented how messed up that whole marketing campaign was. But the actual game itself, when it came out, man, it was just so unbelievably lame. It was wildly disappointing to the point where, yeah, I just returned it. I went, sorry, birthday gift or not, this game sucks. And Steam was letting everybody return it no matter how much time you put into it. I had well past the 2-hour mark. I actually had like 9 or 10 hours in it. I was like forcing myself to play through this, but at a certain point I just said, why am I doing this? I'm not having fun. I can actually get a refund and get something, you know, that I want. And really, I never looked back. I know it might be a little bit of a hot take, but I actually never went back to No Man's Sky. I have not played it since it launched, and I don't plan on it either. I was just that disappointed by it. I was that unhappy with the final product. It just felt like it wasn't anything that was promised to us, and what it was instead was a grindy, boring, unexciting, single-player space crafting adventure. Maybe I would have been a lot more mad about this if I'd actually paid for the game myself, but it was a gift, and then I even got a refund for it, so I can't really be too mad about it. But yeah, I never went back to this one. It will forever be disappointing to me because I have no intention of playing it again. And if you're somebody who really enjoys No Man's Sky, good for you. You probably didn't play it at launch like my dumbass did. Alright, you knew I couldn't have a list like this and not include Sonic the Hedgehog somewhere. I am a die-hard, lifelong fan of the Blue Blur, and I always go out of my way to check out the latest Sonic the Hedgehog game, and I've been disappointed a few times, but I think the most disappointed I've ever been with a Sonic game is Sonic Forces. At this point, I don't go into most Sonic games with any kind of expectation, but Sonic Forces, I was a little hopeful for it. It looked like more of the boost formula. You were going to be able to create your own original character. Finally, DeviantArt has been asking for this for years, and the story seemed a little darker, but then I got the game, played through the game in around 4 hours, and went, wow, that was kinda lame. And looking back, I can say that this is easily one of the worst 3D Sonic games of them all. It's not like unbelievably terrible, it's not Sonic Boom, it's not Sonic 06, it's not Sonic 3D Blast, but sheesh, talk about underwhelming and disappointing. Where to even begin with this game? First off, like I already mentioned, the length. It is pretty short. You can finish the game in around 4 hours, which is short even for a Sonic game. Second, the story really isn't anything all that special. While it starts out a little darker, it quickly immediately devolves down into the usual Sonic story affair, and while there are a few good moments here and there, especially with Knuckles, for the most part it was just kinda whatever. Then we have the OC, creating your own original character. Yeah, it is kinda cool, but I feel like it was a little limited, and what made it limited was the level design. The level design in Sonic Forces is just so ridiculously forgettable, generic, uninteresting, and all around bland. It doesn't do anything you haven't seen before from any Sonic game. It feels like it's on autopilot most of the time, and it just lacks the memorable level design that, say, Sonic Generations had, where there was always tons of paths, there was moments and set pieces in every single level. Here, like, all the levels blur into each other, they're all super short, and you'll have forgotten all about them the very next day. Classic Sonic shows up for really no good reason, and his levels are just downright terrible. and his controls slash physics aren't that great either. And this was like when Sonic Mania had just come out, so we had just had the highest of highs for 2D Sonic games, and then we had this. Modern Sonic fared a little better, but his levels were just kinda there, and they're also ridiculously short. And then we have the OC. These are the most unique levels, these are the best levels of the entire game. They kind of feel like Sonic Heroes levels, and really are the only levels that I can recall anything from outside of when I'm looking at footage of this game. At least the presentation was half decent, and the music, yeah, it's alright. This game really showcased that the boost formula was just kind of worn out by this point and that Sonic needed a serious change. Thankfully we would get that with Sonic Frontiers, but as for Sonic Forces, yeah, it was just kind of lame. So here's one that might be a little bit of a hot take, but let me explain. I have Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes. I don't have Metal Gear Solid 5 Phantom Pain on here. I think that is a great game despite its shortcomings. I'm just talking about Ground Zeroes. Now, I love the Metal Gear series, and when I saw they were making Metal Gear Solid 5, I was very excited, and then I saw that they announced Ground Zeroes, and I was a little confused by it, but I was like, okay, a sort of prologue little game that takes place before Phantom Pain. That could actually be pretty cool. Is it free? Oh no, it's not free. It's like $30 or $40. Okay, then maybe it's more than just a tiny little demo for the game, essentially. Maybe there actually really is something here. And so, like a grade A sucker, I went and pre-ordered the game for full price, which was $40, and then I played it on release. And I beat it on release. I beat the game in under an hour and a half, and I was like, wait, what? The credits started rolling and I just had visible confusion on my face. I was like, where's the game? Then naturally I look it up and it turns out that is the entire game. It really is just the one mission, and don't get it twisted, it is a really good mission and it certainly is replayable, but it's one fucking mission. This should have been a free download, not something you had to pay for, and I just was flabbergasted that I really just got cheated out of this. It felt like they totally took advantage of me being a die-hard Metal Gear fan. They knew that I was going to buy whatever had the phrase Metal Gear in it, and yeah, that's what I absolutely did, and it turned out that it was just this ripoff of a game. I don't know what else to call it, you know, I call it like I see it. It was a ripoff. It feels like Konami created this to get a quick buck from saps like me, and that's probably what they did. In later years, they just eventually included it with Metal Gear Solid 5, so if you just buy the game at all, you get Ground Zeroes. Wow. Thanks, Konami. You're so cool. It was so cool when you ripped me off with Ground Zeroes. Truly unforgettable, and forever disappointing. So here we have Crash Team Rumble. Now, you might have noticed throughout this entire list that, I guess outside of Suicide Squad, there hasn't been any live service titles here. And that's because I don't really have any hype or excitement for a live service game, so it's kind of hard to be disappointed when it doesn't do well, when it shuts down, or it's just not very good. However, there was one live service game that I actually had a mild amount of excitement for, and that was Crash Team Rumble. And I know what you might be thinking, Tubular, this was just another failed live service. How could you have had any excitement for this one? Because it was Crash Bandicoot. I love Crash Bandicoot. I've been playing Crash since I was a little kid. I've played and ranked every Crash Bandicoot game. Like, I love this series. I was ready to give this game a shot. It felt like it was actually trying to do something even a little different from the other live service games. And while it didn't look amazing, I thought this would be a game that I'd be able to come back to every few months and have some fun with, but yeah, it wasn't even that. I played the game at release for around 5 or 6 hours, and then it really set in that this was the entire game. It really was just one game mode. Don't get it twisted, it was a fun game mode, and there were a number of different characters and even maps, but it really was just this one game mode. And by like the 5-hour mark, it had felt like I had seen pretty much everything with the game outside of like some cosmetics and basically the rest of their battle pass. The game was just wildly lacking on content. Like, I had just paid $40 for this game, there's microtransactions, and I feel like I've seen everything in a few hours. That's less than most live service games. And most people complain that live service games are already very content starved. This is even less than that. It was just incredibly bare bones. There should have been some kind of a single player mode, and at least one other game mode. Like, come on, one other game mode really would have been appreciated here. And yeah, eventually they did add another game mode. They did actually update the game, there were some more seasons, and there was a bit more to the game, but low-key it was a little too late. The game was on life support pretty quickly, and I couldn't tell you if anybody's playing it nowadays. I would be really genuinely surprised if anybody is playing this game nowadays. It should have gone to Game Pass or PlayStation Plus like immediately if it wasn't going to go free to play, and straight up I think it should have just been delayed if they couldn't launch it with more than one game mode. But instead, what we're left with is just a disappointing experience, something that could have been way more, like a live service multiplayer Crash Bandicoot game could have actually been really sick. It could have been a really great time, way better than Crash Bash. And yeah, the game really just should have been way better, and I think we all expected a bit more from Toys for Bob, but you know, at least they didn't get shut down by Activision. They're doing their own thing now, I guess. We'll see what they end up doing. Hopefully it's better than Crash Team Rumble, because this was just a little upsetting. So here we have one that people might not agree with, but I have Final Fantasy 13. Now, people have been debating for years whether or not this is a good Final Fantasy, and it feels like people are all over the place, especially nowadays where there's a whole generation of people that are like wildly nostalgic for it. Well, I went into this one with a pretty open mind only a few years after it released, and I ended up playing through the entire game actually, and found it to be rather disappointing by the time I was done with it. There must have been something that kept me going, because I did actually play through the entire game, and this is not a short game by any means. Maybe it was the music. The music is actually really good in this game. The graphics are also really great. Like, the presentation in general is very well done in this game. But the story and the gameplay, yeah, I don't know about that one, Chief. The most obvious thing to bring up first is the level design, or almost lack of level design. You just kind of move forward in these linear straight lines for like 80% of the game. There's no side quests, there's no sense of exploration, there's no open areas. You really just move forward a majority of this game, and yeah, I thought it got pretty lame that that's what you did a lot of the time, and by the time you actually do get to some open areas, the game's almost over, and I'm just like, man, what was the point? And then when it comes to the battle system, I have just never been a huge fan of this game's combat. Like, it's not terrible, but I just never found it all that engaging or fun. Even when I turned off the auto battle, I was like, I mean, this is okay, this is functional, but I feel like it's some of the weakest combat the entire series has seen. And then when it comes to the story, it was just kind of whatever. Like, yeah, there are some decent characters here. I like Lightning, and I think the character design is really good, but when it comes to what happens in this game, how everything progresses, and then the ending, it was just kind of there. By the time I got to the end of the game, all I felt was indifference and was just ready for it to end. And I'm sure there's a whole mountain of people that disagree with me, but that's really just how I felt about this game. This game was so lackluster that I actually just never even bothered to check out 13.2 or Lightning Returns. I have them, but I just have felt no desire to play them. Maybe they're way better than 13. I wouldn't know. All I know is that whenever I hear the meme of someone going, oh yeah, the game gets really good after like 30 hours, just put some time into it, put like 30, 35 hours into it, then it becomes amazing. I think of this game. It takes way too long to actually become even decent, and the pacing along with the other issues I brought up really just kind of killed the game for me. I wasn't expecting greatness, but I expected something a little better than this. So here we have a game that actually came out pretty recently, and that is Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown. Now, I've talked about this game a few times over the last couple months, but I'll briefly go over things again. This game was not the most disappointing game of 2024 for me, that will always be Suicide Squad, but this was arguably the worst game I played in 2024. I just could not believe how bad this game was. The Test Drive series is such a legendary series of racing games, and both Test Drive Unlimited 1 and 2 are absolutely loved. So naturally, when it was announced that the series was coming back after like a 10-year hiatus and it was going to have everything that people loved about the first two, yeah, there was some excitement there. But then the game came out and I played it for a good amount of time and just went, man, this is just awful. The game was lacking in so many key critical areas, and the issues were just so numerous that not only was this just a bad game, but it was a poor excuse for a Test Drive Unlimited. All of the things people loved about the previous games were not really here at all. People really enjoyed the life sim elements of the first two games, and that's just not really here. You don't even get a place, you're just stuck in a hotel. You do get to walk around in first person in a few areas, but this just feels like an afterthought and a waste. There really is no life sim elements here. You do get to choose between two different factions, but man, it doesn't mean a damn thing in this game. And then the game just had some severe fundamental issues. The racing itself isn't that great. The cars don't handle all that well. There's not a great selection of them. The game seriously is lacking in the variety department. It gets repetitive rather fast. The always online bullshit is just inexcusable, and it's just beyond absurd that you can't restart or pause a single player race in a modern racing game. Are you kidding me? The progression is downright terrible. It feels glacial in some aspects. It takes forever to get another car. The game wants you to do these big MMO style raids and events, but there was like nobody playing this game even at launch, so you just couldn't do them. The presentation wasn't very good, and then the open world was severely lacking. While I think the location is really cool and the design of the open world is actually pretty decent, this is such an empty feeling open world. It feels more like Driver on the PS1's open world, where there's just barely any cars and not a single civilian, with plenty of copy-paste bland buildings all over the place. This game was just incredibly bland, and the bottom line was, it just wasn't very fun. Not at all. And that's why it was disappointing for me. I expected this game to be fun. I expected a decent driving game and at least something that kind of resembled the previous two TDUs, but no. What we have here is one of the worst test drive games, and that really is saying something. This series has gone through the ringer, that's for sure. And I think we all wanted things to be different with this one. Alright, so the last game we have today is a very personal one. One of the few games that I was disappointed with when I was a small child, and that is Pokemon Battle Revolution for the Wii. And you might be going, Tube John, what the hell are you even talking about? Let me explain. I love the Pokemon franchise. I've been playing Pokemon since I was a small child, and I didn't really have much access to the internet until I was 13. And then I immediately went and made a YouTube channel that is still being used today. But before that, I remember going to Toys R Us as a kid back when Toys R Us existed, and I saw right then and there on the Wii a brand new Pokemon game I had never heard anything about, and it had some of my favorite Pokemon at the time right there on the cover. And I had never heard of this game whatsoever, and so I asked my parents for it and got told no and to wait for your birthday. I waited for my birthday, and then I ended up getting the game, started it up, played it for a few hours, and went, that's the whole game? See, for the unfamiliar, Pokemon Battle Revolution is actually more like a successor to Pokemon Stadium. It is just battle after battle after battle. There's not really a campaign here, there's no exploration. A lot of the aspects that make a Pokemon game just aren't here. And I didn't know that. I didn't really have any way of knowing that. I thought this was a fully fledged 3D new Pokemon game similar to the previous Pokemon game I had played on a home console, which was Pokemon XD. Pokemon XD was a great game, and it actually was a full-fledged Pokemon game. Sure, it was different from like the mainline games, but it was still a full video game complete with exploration, catching Pokemon, and plenty of battles. Battle Revolution, it really is just battle after battle. There's no discernible story, you can't explore anything, and you certainly can't catch any Pokemon. You can import Pokemon from Diamond and Pearl, but I didn't even have that attachment. There was really no way for me to have known that this was essentially just a battle simulator, and I remember being pretty upset with what the game ended up being. Sure, it's a great looking game, especially for the time, but as a kid you don't really care about stuff like that. I just wanted to catch Pokemon and explore a new 3D world, and I didn't get that here. Obviously, this is a very personal scenario, and if I went into the game now, I would very much have that expectation that it really is just battle after battle. Like, I wasn't disappointed when I played Pokemon Stadium because I knew exactly what I was getting into, but with this, yeah, I expected something else, got something completely different, and 10-year-old me, or however old I was rather unhappy. Of course, I didn't tell my parents this because I didn't want them to feel bad that they just spent $50 on a game and I didn't like it, but a few years later, I did end up getting rid of the game, and haven't really looked back since. Outside of that soundtrack, the music is actually pretty good in Battle Revolution. Alright though, that's it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I talked about some disappointing games, a very personal video with a lot of story time, but I had a lot of fun doing this video. You like this kind of video where I do story time? Let me know down below. If you made it to this part of the video, comment with a classic, bricks. We're talking about bricks here. You're going to get a heart from me. And with that, I wish everybody a good day, night, whatever's the closest to you. Stay safe, y'all. Bye-bye.